Okay, wow, we're doing this. Hello, everyone. This is Yoga Talks Podcast. My name is Jay Brown. I want to thank you for being here and welcome you. If you're new to the podcast, I want to warn you that you have chosen a particularly unusual, or maybe not so unusual for this podcast, but definitely a particularly charged day. I am going to get to a talk that I had with Cora Wen, which is super cool. But before we get to that talk, I have some serious shit to unload. Those of you who've been listening, you know I've been dropping hints. I've been mentioning that there's things going on, but I'm not talking about it. There's reasons why I wasn't talking about it, which I can explain. But today I can talk about it. And it's funny, now that I can talk about it, I almost feel at a loss. It's like, I don't even know how to tell you. I don't even know how to tell you this. All right, I'll try. Let's see. Yesterday, I signed my name on a piece of paper and handed over some keys and got a check. And then now today, for the first time in 10 years, I no longer own a yoga center in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. I let somebody buy me out of my lease. And the process of that happening has been almost as unplanned and crazy as the house. Those of you who remember how I got the house, well, the way this has come about that I have let someone buy me out of my lease and basically finished with the center 3 months earlier than planned has been just a crazy life intervention of sorts, it seemed. Many of you listening might remember back in March, I made an announcement that I was going to close the center down at the end of November. That announcement came after 2 months of exploring the possibility of selling the center. Right at the beginning of the year, I had to consider whether or not I was going to renew my lease at the end of the year. And if you remember from back then, I was having all kinds of health issues and personal life issues. And I just, somewhere in my mind, I think I knew already that I wasn't going to renew the lease, even though I hadn't fully admitted that to myself. And right about that moment is when randomly this business broker guy just showed up while I was sitting at the desk and said, hey, have you ever had any interest in selling your business? And I hadn't ever even thought about that possibility. I was just trying to figure out how I could possibly make enough money to make it through November. And I said, well, I'm interested in the idea of that, but I don't know that anybody would really want to buy this business. I don't know that there's much of a business to buy. And he said, what are you talking about? You have this amazing location and this neighborhood, and you're so well established. You've been here for a decade, and He's like the business guy, you know? And then they got a whole system for how they come up with the numbers, how much the business is worth, and they have formulas for it. And I was like, okay, that's how much it's worth. But the reality is that there's no profit in the yoga center without the teacher training program. There's no teacher training program without me doing it. It's not like some standardized thing that I could just sell to somebody, which was really the issue. It was like, what exactly do I have to sell? So the first meetings, I had maybe 5 or 6 meetings over this 2-month period with these potential buyers. And they all went horribly. I was terrible in these meetings. I just torpedoed them because I'm this yoga guy and I don't know how to do the business the way you're supposed to do when you broker these businesses. And so I remember this one meeting in particular, this gentleman, he says, so how many memberships do you have? And I say, None. I don't believe in them. And you should have seen the look on the guy's face. It was like, isn't this a business? And like, it became clear that it wasn't going to happen like that. Like, it was too sticky, you know? You're not buying what I teach. You're not buying what I write. It just like was so sticky, and it just became like obvious. I was like, okay, well, no one's going to buy this. And that's when I wrote that blog post and made the announcement back in March that I'm going to close at the end of November. And then since then, I've just been trying to hold it down. And if you've been listening, you know it's been a bit of a struggle. I had to find a new place to live, and I've just been like kind of on the seat of my pants trying to like make steps and choices and like not screw stuff up, and in a lot of uncertainty about where exactly I'm going right now. I'm in this new nebulous place, but I still have the center. But now I like live in Easton, so I'm like in two different worlds, you know? And in May, just at the end of May, when I was like in the process with the house, the business broker guy showed up again. He's like, I think I got a buyer. And I was like, really? We've been through this before. He's like, no, this one's different. This one's different. She already has a yoga center. She wants to expand. So I meet with her, and, you know, she has a hot center in another part of Brooklyn, quite far away from here. But, you know, she says to me that she's interested in, you know, expanding and doing more than just hot yoga. And I tell her, you know, well, we have a therapeutic orientation here. And it seemed like this could be a really great thing. Like, this could be an opportunity for the teachers to continue teaching their classes even after I let go of it. It gives me the opportunity to kind of get out of it a couple months earlier, you know, so I was struggling. And so I was like, okay. And we kind of got into this process of sort of seeing, and I kind of thought, I assumed she's a teacher, we could kind of come together on a yoga level, and we could come up with a plan together for a transition and kind of do it, in my mind, like a yogic way, you know? But that is not how it happened. I don't really know how to say it without like being a jerk, but to put it diplomatically, we are not oriented in yoga in the same way. And she's not interested in, you know, the therapeutic orientation that I established here as the signature of the center. She's doing her own thing, and she has a very different managerial style with the teachers. And I just, as the process has gone on, I just, I worried not for the decision to make the sale, but for what the repercussions of that were on the teachers and the students here. Because I haven't said this out loud. This is the first time that I am saying this out loud, but as of today, September 1st, 2017, Abhyasa Yoga Center is now Hotspot Yoga. And I'm not making that up. That is an actual fact. You can check it yourself. Abhyasa Yoga Center does not exist anymore. Abhyasa Yoga Center is now Hotspot Yoga. And anyone who knows me and knows what I've done with the center over the last decade can likely appreciate the profound irony of that. There was a promo video on our website for a very long time. It's not there anymore. But it was there, and in that promo video, I made this statement that I opened the center as an alternative to what I referred to as the boot camp styles of yoga. And basically, that is exactly the thing that's taking over the space 10 years later. It's profoundly ironic, almost to the point of tragedy. But honestly, at the same time, it is absolutely a relief for me. right now in this moment, you know what it feels like? It feels like for the last, I'd say 7 years since we had children, definitely, I've just been adding on more and more, like more hats to wear, more responsibilities, more projects. And it's all stuff that I enjoy, you know, the blog, the podcast, my teaching, the traveling, my family, like the center, like all of it. It's all everything that I've wanted to do and wanted to be. But it's just more and more getting stacked on and getting stacked on without ever like getting rid of anything, without ever like making room for the new thing by cutting something out. Just always adding more on, adding more on, adding more on. Kind of like a hoarder or something, right? I'm like hoarding responsibilities and different roles to play to a point where like you can't even move around your apartment or ever imagine how you could possibly get rid of anything. And then today it feels like that show. Have you seen that show where they do the interventions on the hoarders? And they just like go in and just like take everything out. That's what it feels like. Somebody came in and just took out a lot of almost all my stuff out. And I'm like freaking out. Like, wait, but that thing over there collecting dust that I haven't touched in 10 years, that thing's important. Don't touch it. Ah! I feel like totally emptied out, you know? Showed up to teach my class tonight and like the Abhyasa logos were off the door. It said Hot Spot Yoga. She's like rearranging everything. I mean, we just closed yesterday. It was supposed to be a gradual transition. Everything was messed up on the website. All the teachers were emailing me because their classes said that they're teaching Hot Vinyasa Yoga instead of chair or restore. I mean, it was a shit show day, you guys. It was a rough first day in this transition. And I stipulated as part of the agreement that I was going to continue teaching my classes for like the next 3 weeks through the 26th, basically through this month, because I was just finishing up a teacher training at the end of August when we were finalizing things, and I felt like I needed a little bit more time, like a few more weeks to make good on the commitment to those teacher trainees. And so I'm teaching classes here, even though I don't own it, which also puts me in a position to actually see what's happening with the place and kind of be in the same boat as the teachers. I'm in the same boat now. I'm not the owner anymore. And it's weird. They're all coming to me and saying, Jay. And I'm like, I don't know. And it's hard. It's a hard emotional reality, you know. I think a lot of the teachers haven't had to teach at other centers where the owners are treating them in different ways, and I'm feeling that's the thing that I feel bad about, you know. I was really hoping to be leaving the teachers in a better situation than it feels like they're in today. I think it's going to get better. I think she's hopefully going to turn things around. It was just the first day, you know. But it's crazy, you guys. It's a crazy, crazy, crazy thing. I do really understand something about yoga centers when they close and why some of the shitty stuff happens. Like, I know there's a lot of yoga teachers who listen to this, and I'm sure if you've been in the game for even not that long, you've been around when a center closes, and very often it happens in unceremonious ways, you know, where like teachers don't get paid and the owner just skips out, and then you show up and the doors are just locked. There's no notice or nothing. And I kind of get it. I kind of understand, because basically when you get to the point that you decide that you're not going to carry on with the center, often I think you're at a point where you're barely hanging on. Like, you're already kind of drowning a little bit in it. And so at some point, just like it becomes too much of a burden, and I can kind of see why people just cut and run. And I'm trying desperately not to do that, And let me just say, I'm kind of in the back of my mind, I hear a voice saying, sell out, sell out. And I just want to be frank and say, it's not that much money. And it doesn't even pay off all the debt I've taken on from the center. You know what I mean? It doesn't really, it's not like I'm making money off the center. I'm just not completely drowning. And it feels like a gift. Basically, if this hadn't happened, I think I would have been in a really, really, not that I'm not already in a difficult situation, but it would have been much worse. So in a way, I'm grateful for it happening, for that. But now I got all these loose ends. So many loose ends to tie up. So many loose ends that I have not even had a moment to take in the emotional reality of it, But I do have the next few weeks to kind of sort of say goodbye, and we're going to have to see how it goes. So that's it. That's the news that I've been sitting on. There's more to the story. I think we're going to have to come back to it. It's too much to tell all in one shot, so we're going to have to come back to it, and maybe I can calm down and actually feel it for a second. But that's it. No more yoga center. Just a yoga teacher. That's okay. I think, like I mentioned, that analogy of the hoarder, I feel like now that I'm hollowed out, in a way, it's like a bit of a return. It's a return to something that I got away from, Even with the center, honestly, I feel like I realize how much being so overloaded and having too much on me, it really sacrificed the friendship and the time spent with people that made the magic happen. Somewhere along the way, little bit by little bit, I've been too occupied with other things and gotten away from that. And so now it's it's all that's left, I had a class tonight and it was all teachers and people from the training. And it was a special class. So there you have it. That's it. That's the big news. I'll tell you more about it later, maybe. I think it's time for us to get to this talk with Cora Wen. Cora Wen, who I did not know at all, but we have a mutual friend in Jenny Lynn Carson from Yoga Dork. And she's been on the podcast. You can go back and check out that podcast with Jenny Lynn. In any case, Jenny Lynn said to me, hey, maybe you want to talk to Cora Wen? And the name just blurted into my head. I was like, oh yeah, I know that name. I've seen that name around for ever, but why don't I know more about her? So that's why I talked to her, and I found out why. I found out a lot about her. It's a fun conversation. And yeah, we're going to get to it soon. First, real quick, let me tell you about my stuff. I'm going to be in Falls Church, Virginia, Sunday, September 10th. I am going to be in Japan, Tokyo, September 29th through October 9th. I am going to be in Tarrytown, New York on November 5th. You can find out about those gigs and listen to the archives of this podcast and check out my blog. I've got a blog that came out today about what I was talking about with the center, some other aspects of that if you want to read that. And you can also check out my online video stuff and my live streaming subscription, which was so fun. I live streamed classes from Finland. That was awesome. Some of you came to Finland with me. And if you guys want to try to get in on some of my classes via live stream, you can do that with a live stream subscription. Just to know, I have already been in talks with some people about teaching some local classes even after I leave the center. So that live stream is going to continue. And you can find all of that stuff at jbrownyoga.com. Show support for the podcast. Go to iTunes, write a review, give us stars. go to a blog or podcast page, make a direct donation. That would be very cool and much appreciated. But I think that's it. I think I've talked enough, and we should get to the talk today with Cora Wen.
Okay. How are you, Jay Brown? How's the weather out there? Are you in the city?
No, I'm not.
Where are
moved. I moved at the end of June. I'm in Easton, Pennsylvania right now.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
You are near a friend of mine who has a yoga studio.
Who's that?
Well, she used to have a yoga studio.
Oh, okay.
Teresa, Yoga Studio Madison.
I don't know.
Which is actually in New
I
Jersey.
just got here. I know the woman who owns Easton Yoga, and then there's another town called Bethlehem, and there's a center there, and I've talked with them. So I'm just kind of meeting people now, so I don't know a lot of folks yet.
Oh, it's so fun because also my friend that's coming to visit me next weekend is driving from Easton to come to see me.
Oh, wow. Well, how about that? It's kind of on the way. It's right there on 78, a lot of people have come by.
Okay, yeah. Is there a university there or something? She's dropping off a gal for school.
That's right. It's called Lafayette College.
Oh, okay. And it's interesting. It's a Cambodian student that my friend has been helping to sponsor to get to the U.S. And so she's dropping her off in Easton.
Crazy how intricate life is.
I know. And then you are there because you bought a house, right?
I did find a new place to live here in this new neighborhood, and it's been going really good. My little daughter, she already has a new best friend. There's a 7-year-old girl who lives right across the street. So, so far, so
great.
good.
So she's in school already, right then?
No, not yet. In a couple of weeks, they go to school, but we moved in, and then all of a sudden there was a knock on the door, and this adorable 7-year-old from across the street heard that a 7-year-old moved into this place and wanted to meet her. And so they're like,
oh my God, how funny.
Yeah,
that's
so they're like,
great.
They're already like best friends. So it's great. But Cora, when you're in the house, I'm really intrigued to have this opportunity to talk to you today. Thanks for giving me some of your time.
Oh, sure. It was actually funny because when Jenny Lynn had connected us, it was because something was going on, and I thought that you might want to chase down. But then when you connected with me for the podcast, I thought that was just interesting because I feel like I'm not, one of the yoga celebrities of the modern day. I'm just watching from afar and getting more and more quiet.
But it's amazing that that's the first thing that you said, because I always have to try to come up with something in my mind of where I want to start a conversation with someone. And it usually comes off of like whatever I know about them or whatever my preconceived ideas about them, which are often proved wrong. But you, I had this really specific idea because I know your name. I've known your name since as long as I've been in the yoga world, but I've never really seen you on like big, yoga journal conference bills or like. I have this idea that we've been talking about on the podcast a lot where I feel like yoga was really underground when I first got to it. And then it became mainstream. And now I feel like it's kind of going underground in certain ways again. And you, I feel like, is someone who's
it is.
But you've kind of kept it underground all these years. That was my question. And so when you just said that, what I wonder is that something that you decided to do, or is that just how it played out for you?
Kind of both. Like, it's interesting because, I met, for instance, Yoga Dork back when Yoga Dork was not outed.
Oh, when she was still anonymous. Yeah.
She was like an unknown. And in fact, some people thought I was Yoga Dork.
Oh, how interesting.
It was really interesting because, and I'm like, why would that even be? But it was because
you have like vocal opinions and stuff, and you were out there. I could see why someone might think that.
Yeah. But I'm also sort of underground. So especially when she was not outed. And so it was sort of I think what happened is that I have always been a bit of a traditionalist. And I came to yoga from a Buddhist meditation background, not from a fitness background. Right. So it was sort of more that yoga was such an amazing practice for me on a deep psychological level. that, I thought it was like too precious.
Yeah. Oh, so was that like it? You were just sort of, you never. Well, let me ask it this way, because I'm looking at the rest of your bio, okay? Because you just said you're a traditionalist, and I think that's true. It's like a lot of times these days when you're like getting to know like a teacher's credentials or whatever, someone will ask like, what certification do you have, or something like that, right? And in the old times, it was more like who you studied with. And when I look at your bio, I don't see certifications. I see an apprenticeship with Eric Schiffman. I see assisting Rodney Yee. I see assisted and traveled with Judith Hansen-Lassiter. I see mentored by Patricia Walden. All these people, a couple have been on the podcast, are like these seminal teachers, and you just spent time with them clearly, you know what I mean? And like learned from them in that more traditional way. And yet they're big names. So you never followed in their footsteps and tried to like work the big name part of it, or?
I mean, I think it's interesting. I've actually taught at Yoga Journal conferences in San Francisco.
Okay.
I've taught at Yoga Journal conferences in Thailand. Okay. I've, been like keynote speaker at Yoga Alliance conferences. But the thing is that I just like the fame game.
So that says something. You never really worked it.
Yeah. I mean, in fact, it's interesting. I was reflecting on this recently. I think because of this conversation, and I was surprised that you had knew, that you had come across my name, because I'm not in the social media Insta celeb.
Yeah, but I know your name from before that, because I came into it. I started practicing in maybe 91 or 92 or something like that. I know you started teaching in 94 or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So you were there, you were around, and
yeah. So I mean, I think that part of it is that I didn't enjoy conferences. I felt that conferences were really about. I love conferences in Asia. The conferences in Asia and Thailand were beautiful because it was really about me going home and teaching amongst people that looked like myself and had bodies like myself and, understood quiet, and understand, when I speak in Chinese medicine terms, if I say put your energy in kidney 1. I don't have to tell you where it is.
Wow, that's interesting. You certainly would have to tell me. Yeah.
Right. Like in Malaysia, for instance, where it's the I feel is even more Chinese than sometimes China, like Hong Kong, where I'm from, because it's very traditional. They have Chinese medicine is very much part of daily life. In other words, like when you go to eat in a restaurant, you would order a bowl of noodle soup, either with regular soup or with herbal soup. And if it's herbal soup, then it's Chinese medicine soup. Meaning that it has things that are going to be seasonally good for you. In the winter, certain things, and in the summer, certain things. And so that's just part of what the nature of the people is. And so when I teach in those countries and I talk in a more esoteric way where I bring up energy meridians, that is really beautiful to be able to share that without a lot of description, and really have more experiential, more subtle experiences with energy. I think what I don't like about the fame game is that there's expectations of the teacher, and the teacher then also gets sucked into the fame game. I know that when I was really young in my yoga teaching, I talked to Eric and Schiffman and Rodney and I annoyed everybody, oh God, I should stop teaching. Oh, I should go get a job. Oh, how can I do this? Oh, blah, blah, blah. Right. Patricia, I annoyingly said, should I certify an Iyengar? Should I certify an Iyengar? And I just kept on bugging everybody. It got to the point where they knew it was a certain time of year. Where I would question my teaching, because I didn't sort of go the route of what would be, that more getting getting the gigs.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, you have to imagine that my teachers are not very big on promoting that.
No, they have always had their own thing. The feather pipe, I've just gotten sort of to know it a little bit. It's like its own little special world. But I'm wondering how, you mentioned that when you go teach in Asia, it's like going home. And I'm wondering, like, how old were you when you left Asia?
Well, I was born in Hong Kong, and I came to America for about a little less than a year when I was about 7, and then we went back to Taiwan, and then moved kind of to Switzerland on the way back to America. So I kind of came back and forth, and then basically emigrated here when I was about 10, 10 or 11, about then. I mean, it was kind of back and forth, so... but I would say about 10. And I was born in Hong Kong, so English was a language that I spoke from childhood, as well as Chinese. And then having been educated mostly in America, but I had a little foray. I went to Australia for a while and Switzerland, in high school, but lived a lot of different places.
Was that because of your parents' jobs or whatever? Like, why were you moving around so much?
It was not because of jobs so much as just sort of personal stuff. Like, I wanted to go away to boarding school, and my parents wanted me to go away to a Swiss boarding school, like a Swiss, finishing school. And so we had this big riot of personalities when I was, 12.
Yeah.
And so I did not go to a finishing school. I basically told my mother at one point, after we looked at several boarding schools, that if they put me in one of these boarding schools, that I would guarantee her that I would become a heroin addict and I would run away from home.
Well, I know. So, I read in your
that
bio
was their choice.
that you eventually did land in like the New York City in the 70s, like hanging out with Deborah Harry and Patti Smith or something like that. I read. Is that right?
Right. I did. So I ended up working with a man named Steven Sprouse, who was a designer who worked for Halston, who was a quintessential 60s designer, fashion designer. And then he, when I knew him, he designed clothes for a rock and roll band. So we made clothes for Blondie, Debbie Harry and The Clash and Patti Smith and Angie Bowie.
So awesome. I just have to take a second. I'm sorry. That is awesome. Those are some of that's some of my favorite music in the world. Did you get to meet those people?
Yeah, we hung out. You make clothes, you hang out,
Yeah.
Also it was the 70s. It wasn't like you make clothes, like there was a fashion house. If you look up Steven Sprouse, he was known for like graffiti, sort of neon hues, graffiti print. He ultimately did the graffiti handbags for Louis Vuitton for Marc Jacobs, when Marc Jacobs was at Vuitton. But when I was working with him, we were just mostly rock and roll. And so the creativity was more like kind of what the band was doing. So Parallel Lines, which was the Blondie album, was sort of that whole time that I was working with them. And we had a color Xerox machine in the studio, which was unheard of in 1977, 78.
Yeah.
And part of the printing of the fabric were like Xerox prints blown up. We just were like completely crazy. It was just completely crazy.
Yes. That's awesome. Amazing time to be in New York, I bet.
Yes. And I was like Studio 54. I was like at studio every night. It was just really bad. And that was partly why I left New York, because it was the era of Studio 54 and I was at Studio 54 every night. Therefore, I wasn't at, Columbia, right? I wasn't able to attend classes in a manner at college. So I left New York and moved to Chicago, and went to the University of Chicago and then continued west. So I think also having been brushed early on with sort of fame right at the cusp of it, made me not so interested in pursuing it as with gusto. It actually made me see the sides of it that are precarious. And then remember also I came from a Buddhist background.
That's right. So how do you go from a Buddhist background to, like, as you wrote, sowing your wild oats in New York City, to then like an 11-year career in banking? How does that happen?
Gosh, it's just a crazy,
because that's the next note I have about your bio. I'm like, okay, well, how do we get to the banking part?
Right. Well, I basically, went from fashion, then like a career in fashion, and then in different parts of clothing. Like I worked for Esprit Decor. They were a large company in the 80s. I don't know if you remember them.
I remember them. They had a shop in the mall. I had friends who worked there. I remember that company, sure.
Yes, yeah. So I worked at the corporate offices with Doug and Susie Tompkins in San Francisco. And I also worked for a Japanese designer named Comme des Garçons, and opened their first store in America in the 80s. So I did a lot of fashion, like from the high end, sort of custom, to then sort of high fashion. The CDG is their downtown Soho store was sort of the first of that kind of very spare store. Beautiful space, all empty, 2 pieces of clothing hanging, and that was. We had to measure. I had to measure 4 fingers between each hanger.
Well, that's like a convention now, Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But that was, in like the 80s, right? And then also the shop and shop, which was the Esprit. We developed the shop and shop program, was the idea of small brand shops within a Macy's, let's say. And so Esprit had little brand shops within Macy's as well as mall shops. But the shop in department stores was a very modern concept at the time too. So that was something that I worked on as well. And then what happened was I then worked for a company called Bugle Boy Industries, which is also like a more mass manufacturer of like mid-range kind of junior clothing. And in that company, what happened was, as I was working in product placement, which is to place the garments,
okay,
I ended up then, this is how weird it is. I ended up then being in charge of the travel department.
Okay. The travels, like booking travel for the execs or something?
Yeah, and like all our buyers and like our designers going to Asia, and had a private plane at the company, like all the travel, like anything that, and that meant like negotiating with United Airlines and, negotiating with Avis, like all the sort of a travel manager. I was the travel. Okay. That was when travel management was like a new career. Okay.
Yeah.
So I was at the forefront of that travel management. And from there, a headhunter found me and said, there's a bank which is doing travel cards, credit cards, to compete with corporate American Express. So it was corporate Visa cards. And I said to her, I have no idea about banking. Like, are you serious? I've been in fashion. I've been like, there's no banking.
Yeah.
But I ended up working for the bank, and it was for a corporate Visa card, which then ultimately became e-commerce. Jay.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So that's at the forefront of e-commerce, basically.
Wow.
And then my clients were, because we were the largest Visa corporate card, I worked for a company called U.S. Bank in Minnesota. I also had huge accounts, and so my accounts at one point was just all of California, which was like 97 accounts, but then became just one account, just a few accounts like Nestle and Lockheed. But then when Lockheed Martin merged, I became like the liaison for Lockheed Martin for the bank, and we had their banking, e-commerce. So it was this huge.
That's wild. So you spent 11 years in that, huh?
And so I burnt out.
You got totally burnt out.
I just totally burnt out. And I started doing yoga, and I wanted to teach yoga, and, I was making a 6-figure income. I was single, living in California. crazy. And I decided to quit the banking career and start teaching yoga. And it was because of Eric Schiffman and India Supra.
Really? Wow. Those are some awesome people. I had an opportunity to spend some time with India recently. She's awesome. She's such a great lady. So
Yes.
how did that happen? So tell me a little bit about how, when it all went to crap and then you found your way. What was like that first yoga class?
My first yoga class was with Rodney Yee.
Okay. Where was that?
In the Redwoods, in this hiking retreat.
How did you end up on a hiking retreat with Rodney Yee?
Because Rodney Yee was just a yoga teacher at Oakland at the time.
Yeah. Right? He wasn't Rodney Yee yet.
And it was in the Redwoods.
Yeah.
No. And so it was insane. There was like 11 students. We got up at dawn. We did yoga. We did yoga in this gym, like with gym equipment. It was crazy. And then we went on this hikes into the Redwoods. And our guide was this barefoot Nepali guy who used to chant the Bhagavad Gita. And we would follow the chant. I mean, it was crazy. And this was my first yoga experience.
Wow.
After having wanted to do yoga forever, because I grew up in Hong Kong and saw people, Indian yogis, like sadhus doing yoga on the street. And I remember laying on my belly. I always remember laying on my belly all the time and putting my feet on my head in Rajakapotasana and thinking, oh, this is a yoga pose. And always wanting to do yoga.
So it's coming home a little bit. Yeah, that's wild. So
yeah, it was definitely.
Okay, so you had a good class and hike with Rodney in the Redwoods? That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it was just insane. And I remember my very first class, and Rod pulled me up in a back bend in Urdhva Dhanurasana, and I felt like, and I remember we've talked about this a couple of times, I literally felt, and I've talked to India about it, I literally felt like in my body, everything that I had ever studied in the years of sitting still, hoping that something would happen, right, in meditation, and just being like mind agitated, I felt suddenly in my body like, oh my gosh, everything that they ever said totally makes sense. Like bliss and joy, wisdom and compassion. Like, I get that. Oh, it was almost like this last bit of a practice that had started when I met a monk really early on, when I was a baby, basically.
You remember that?
Oh, yeah, I do remember Sifu, yeah. I spent a lot of time with him. Oh. He started a temple in California called the City of 10,000 Buddhas.
Okay.
His name is Master Hua.
And so in this assisted yoga pose, you come, it all kind of comes together. It makes sense. I know.
Yeah, it all came together.
I remember having that feeling. It's like, wow, this totally makes sense. Everything started to make sense in a moment. I totally get it.
Everything starts to make sense. And then I remember just like becoming obsessed, and I did 37 workshops that first year.
Me too. I went crazy. Okay. So how did you end up with Eric?
I lived in Santa Barbara, and he taught in the teacher training there. And not that I met him at the teacher training, because I wasn't in the teacher training. He taught there, and what happened was I went to a dinner party. His brother, Carl, was a friend of mine, and we were at a dinner party, and I met Eric. And he said, well, why don't you come to class in L.A.? And I said, oh, that's kind of inconvenient, from Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
And so then he said something about this Montana retreat, and I said, oh, I'll just come to Montana. And he kept on saying, but why don't you just come to L.A.? It's closer. Yeah. And so I signed up and went to Montana. And you know how that is when you get to the Feather Pipe, and, it's like, it's a whole different
scene. It's crazy. Well, what year was that? What year is that when you went?
Oh, God, 91, 90, 89, I don't know.
Yeah.
Somewhere like that.
Okay.
Maybe 88, maybe, I don't know, somewhere like late 80s, early 90s.
Okay.
And so, how there's that there was some misconnection, and I ended up getting there like at midnight, okay, where you get to the ranch and it's pitch dark.
Yeah.
You have no idea where you are. You are just driven by some car, by some taxi. Some kid shows up with a flashlight to take you to your tent. Yeah. I have like no idea where I am, Jay. Like seriously, I have just started doing yoga, and I wake up in this tent and I go. So I've missed the gather of like, hi, my name is, I'm from
the
blah,
orientation,
blah, blah.
the orientation, yeah.
Yeah, and like, how like don't have food in your tent because of bears and like all that, right?
Yeah.
Like, my granola is in my tent. I mean, it's just like ridiculous. It was so stupid. But I go to class the next day, and Eric remembered me from Santa Barbara.
Oh.
And
you were at the Feathered Pipe, which is a magical place.
Yeah, and also with amazing people. I mean, in that retreat, there were many, many people that, have stayed in yoga for a long time, but also have gone on. Like JJ Gormley was in that retreat. She's a yoga therapist. She owned a studio in DC. Just a lot of people that own studios. And at the time, not many people owned studios. So I met a lot of people very quickly because I met India. Mm-hmm. So I was able to connect with quite a lot of people. And they all encouraged me to, teach yoga. Mm-hmm. And then Eric actually called the Santa Barbara Yoga Studio like 5 times.
He hooked you up.
And they called me and said, he never even responds to like email, right? And he's called us 5 times. So you have to come teach.
Oh.
And
so you did?
Yeah, I did. And I was still at the bank. And so I was working at the bank, working with Lockheed Martin, flying to Bethesda, Maryland every week.
Wow.
And then teaching on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I remember so many times being on an airplane, calling the studio and saying, you got to get a sub for Friday night.
Oh, wow.
Because it's a problem.
You were living in 2 worlds. You were living in 2 worlds.
Yeah, I was totally living in 2 worlds. I mean, I learned to do Mendi, like the henna tattoos. I was going to like Renaissance fairs and like doing henna things on the weekend. I was teaching yoga. I was completely out of my mind. And that's also why I got sick.
Okay.
And so I remember I was going to Feathered Pipe every summer to assist Eric. And I think what happened with assisting Eric happened not because I wanted to assist, but because the workshop was sold out.
Yeah.
In Little Rock.
He needed some help. He needs some help, huh?
Yes, Little Rock, Arkansas. And so we flew to Little Rock, and that was the first time I assisted him. Uh-huh. And then I stayed assisting him for, I guess, 7 years.
Yeah.
7 or 8 years.
So that's a whole yoga education in and of itself, I'm sure.
Yeah, and we traveled together, and we spent time, I spent a lot of time actually talking to him about sequencing. Like, he would say, what should we teach tomorrow? And I would go through sort of like, it was my education. Mm-hmm. I think we should do this because, these people are this because I see that these people are here, and we should do this. Mm. And I did the same thing with Rodney as well. I assisted him.
So how did that happen? How did you go from doing that with Eric and then doing with Rodney?
Because I had been going to classes with Rodney, and so then I just started assisting Rodney, and then I had already been assisting Eric. And I remember one Yoga Journal conference at Estes Park, and I was literally so exhausted because I was assisting Rodney Yee, Eric Schiffman, and Judith Lassiter.
Yeah, okay, that's the other one. So how did you start it? How does that happen? How are you assisting all those people? Is it just like working out, like Rodney's your local guy in Santa Barbara, and then you're doing the Feathered Pipe and some other gigs with Eric, and then how does Judith get in there?
No, I actually never studied with Rodney in California. I studied mostly with him. I was a banker, so I traveled.
Yeah.
So I would book. I was crazy. I basically made the bank help fund my education.
Well, you were the travel person, right? You could get away with it.
Well, no, what I would do is I would say, like, you're sending me to Bethesda, Maryland, right, for a meeting on Tuesday, and I have to fly home on Friday. That's going to cost you $1,200. I'll stay the weekend, and I'll save you money. It'll cost you $400. Mm-hmm.
You're saving him money.
And then I would fly. Yeah, and then I would go to Virginia to go study with Rodney or Eric because they were teaching.
Right.
And then I would book like Dallas when I knew that they were teaching. I literally booked meetings around my yoga teachers.
Nice.
I was completely crazy.
Yeah, but you fit it in. You fit it in. But it's sort of like, but you know what that makes me think of? Like today, people, when they like want to do yoga teacher training and they have other jobs, it's always about how you're going to fit it in. So you were just like fitting in your teacher training to this job you had.
And we didn't have teacher training.
No, that's what I'm saying.
We didn't have teacher training. We didn't have the Yoga Alliance. Wasn't It
was going and studying with these people and spending time with them. That was your training.
And spending time with them. That was the training. And then when they decided that you should be a teacher was when you were a teacher. So Eric and Rodney both said start teaching. I remember crying at dinner with Rodney the very last year when I was like hanging out at the bank, and I was like, I really wanted to quit. And I met him for dinner. I remember this. I flew down. I met him for dinner in Santa Monica, and there was some like movie star.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of Jay Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.